I'm actually super excited, dude. I've been listening to y'all's podcast for like ever. So when you slid into my messaged me on Twitter, I was texting all the guys, like Mouthy and all of them. I was like, holy shit. I was like, this is like awesome because I've always been interested in the theory side of things, like
Yeah,
for a
yeah.
while, but like it's so hard, especially online, because like you have all like the Twitter lefties, who are like
Yeah.
shilling like Mao, and I'm like, that's not what I'm interested in. Like I'm interested in like I don't know, when I found like Zizek, for instance, I got really into that, and then like Lacan, and then obviously I read Marx because half of them don't read Marx. So whenever I
Yeah, yeah, I
first
saw you tweeting. I saw you tweeting about that you bought some Zizek books because I guess Verso books had some sweet sales.
yeah, they had a 40% off sale, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna take advantage of that. Even though I think I have some reading I want to do before I get totally into Zizek, I'm gonna plow through some of it just to like see what I can get, and then go back and then read it again later. Um,
That's gonna be challenging, dude. Like I remember when I remember trying to read Zizek back when I was an undergrad and I didn't have that much philosophy background. I mean, am I mistaken? Are you like graphic design or something? Did I see you tweet
yeah,
that?
yeah, I
Or
do.
you talked about it in one of your videos.
Yeah, I do like graphic design and like UI UX and then like motion graphics. But I've always had like an interest in politics and philosophy, but my parents weren't the most supportive about like philosophy for education, you know. So like
Yeah, they
did
always say, "What are you
something.
gonna do?"
Yeah, so I did something else that I could get a job with, but on the side I've been like doing my own reading or listening to like uh other stuff. Like I've listened to y'all stuff. I listened to there's the Zizek and So On podcast. I listen to them. There's some other philosophy podcasts I listen to, but to get my own like fix, because like that's what I'm into. So I do kind of like my own independent sort of stuff, and I'm working my way through obviously the canon of like Western philosophy, like the big ones. But I always hear like I've listened to a lot of Zizek stuff, obviously when I came to the left. So I was like, I really like the conclusions this guy comes to. Like I want to know how he gets there. So
Yeah.
reading his stuff has been like super good. Like I actually through the sublime object of ideology, I kind of got how he conceptualized ideology. And then later I read an article because the Israel Palestine stuff was going on. Um, so I was reading stuff like what did he have to say about this? Like I usually like whatever his like take is, so maybe he can like give me something that I'm not hearing from most people. And he talks about how like actually like 50% of the Jews in Israel are secular or atheist, while like claiming that they're trying to get their holy land or whatever. And the way he phrased it, I literally saw it in the same way that he like describes ideology, and I was like, hold up, I can literally see how he uses this almost like abstract concept and like actual reality, and it was super cool. Like it was like a brain blast moment for me. I was like, oh my god, I'm getting it, like it's clicking a little bit in here. um
Yeah, man. I mean, I think I had a similar experience when I came across Zizek on YouTube also, but this was like way back in like 2010, like 2011, a while ago, you know? And I remember just being kind of floored by the kind of things that he was saying. And like, exactly, I think you described it well when you said it's like, I want to know how he got to those conclusions, right? How is he noticing or making the kinds of observations that he's making? So, yeah, like I mean that totally resonates with me. But like I said, it was really hard for me to start reading Zizek without the background. So I was kind of curious. I know well, you said a couple things. You said one thing that when I came to the left. So I guess one thing I'm curious about is did you used to have different political leanings, or did you just were you kind of apolitical? And then the other thing that you said or the other thing I'm curious about as well is, when you're in school, you're studying graphic design, but have you like kind of did you have the opportunity to take a lot of electives in philosophy or political theory, or what was that like?
well, first with the philosophy, taking that in class, I got to take one philosophy class because it was a like a requirement, but I didn't have enough electives because my major is so packed. It was so like I'm so glad to be graduated because it was so much work. They're like 3-hour classes twice a week because they're studio classes, so they didn't really leave much room for electives other than electives that you can take in the art building. So I didn't get to
Right.
take like any formal like education, which was it sucks. But I do plan eventually. I'm obviously gonna wait a little bit because I just got out of school, but I do want to go back. And
Oh yeah.
I think that's what I want to go tackle. But I want to do that for like myself, just because it's something I'm into. So right now I'm like I'm gonna get a job with the degree I have now, and then get some money put back, and then go do that. Because I've had to pay for my education stuff myself. Because the parents dropped me off and they were like, "Good luck," sort of thing. So then obviously, whenever I finally realized what my real interests were, I didn't want to change my major when I was so close. Um,
Student loans, I guess, or
yeah,
did you? Or
that and then paying out of pocket. So like I
wow,
was like working full time trying to pay it, and I was like, there's no way that I'm gonna make myself like restart. I just need to get my degree. I can get more money, and I can go back. Like no big deal. Like whatever. I'm 22. I got like a long time to go. I can spend all the time doing
for sure,
this.
man. I was really. I mean, I it took me a long time. I was actually talking about this with Mouthy because you kind of connected us, and thanks for that, by the way.
Yeah, of
And
course.
I remember telling him that I also or I was kind of like a late bloomer in my academia. Maybe you've heard me talk about this on the podcast. I think I've talked about it in like maybe one or two episodes that I was a terrible student in high school. And I didn't go back to I didn't go back to university until I was kind of like almost in my mid 20s. So yeah, the point is like you got lots of time to figure out what you want to do with your life.
Yeah, I had a lot of people in class who were like 26 or like older, and I was like, okay, well, I can go back. Like I can always do that. But yeah,
For sure.
actually, um, that's something I really really want to do for my own sake. Even if it doesn't mean like professing somewhere or anything. I just that's just for my own sake basically because it's what I'm really into. That I keep coming back to. Like the thing is I'll like kind of have to stop reading because things will get busy or whatever. Or but I'm always like slightly engaged in it, and then when I get free time like I do now, I'm like okay, back to the books. Like let's get this stuff. What was the first thing you said? I just totally
Oh, I
forgot.
mentioned about you. You said when I came to the left. Maybe that was
Oh,
just a way
okay.
you were speaking. I was curious
No,
if you
no, no.
had previous political.
Yeah, so I grew up in a really conservative town because I'm in Texas. So I
Okay.
was in East Texas, which is a really red area of Texas, and so a lot of my family was conservative. The town I was in was conservative, and I always felt like I didn't fully fit with that. But obviously, there's like social pressure when you're around a bunch of people that are that way to kind of you know believe what they believe. And so it took until I could move out basically before I like really started examining like what I thought. And then by that time I was obviously always interested in like the more intellectual side of things. So this is why I use Jordan Peterson as an example. I think you used him as an example for universality and like the rhetoric he uses at some point in the podcast. And I like took that because for me, whenever I was trying to figure out where I aligned, he came off as like this sort of like he used that rhetoric and it appealed to me. And I was
Yeah.
like, yeah, this is what I agree with. So I was like trying to understand him and his like critiques of like postmodernism and neo-Marxism. It's funny. I watched the Zizek Jordan Peterson debate. When that first happened, I was like a fan of Jordan Peterson. So it's really
Really?
yeah. So like
Oh, that's funny, man. I was actually at that debate in person.
really that debate
Yeah.
is it's I know like because Peterson doesn't really know what Marxism is, it wasn't like the most fruitful, but it was entertaining, and I got like good thought from Zizek, especially when I went back and being on the left, I watched it again because I started thinking like, wait, I like this Zizek guy. Wait, I remember watching a debate with him against when I like Jordan Peterson, who I don't like now that I disagree with on a lot of things. Let me rewatch that. Um,
Wait, I'm really curious. Sorry, by the way, like I know I'm asking a lot of questions.
you
I'm
were
just like a
totally good
curious
too.
person. Um, so that's I'm kind of curious. What was that experience like watching it as kind of a Peterson fan? Because I think they seem to kind of get along. Which I mean, some people really didn't like it. I kind of like that Zizek wasn't like trying to go for the throat, but instead kind of like offer alternative interpretations of things and kind of poke at his belief system. But so I wonder, like, as a as a Peterson fan, like, what was that experience of watching that? Like, did you kind of understand what was going on, or did you find what Zizek was saying appealing, or were you just like, I don't get it?
Uh, totally. As a Peterson fan, you don't understand what Zizek's talking about. At least from my
Okay,
point of view, like to me, I was like, "What is this guy on?" Like, I have no idea, like what he's talking about. Especially, whenever he says like, "I'm more of a Hegelian than a Marxist." Like,
mm,
what's a Hegelian? Like, I have no idea
yeah,
what
yeah,
that is.
sure.
And to me, at the time, Marxism was obviously like some sort of like totalitarian, like communism, exactly the USSR or China or something. And it's so funny to think about because now I look back at that and I'm like, I wish I could talk to old me because old me is so wrong, like so mixed up about almost
Oh, dude,
everything.
man, that's how, I mean, you know that we joke on the podcast. If you listen, have been listening long enough about 20-year-olds not knowing anything.
Exactly, yeah. During that time, I didn't know anything, and the sort of like I guess I know Jordan Peterson takes like at least some of his ideas trying to take from like Nietzsche or whatever. So I guess it also goes joke about like um 18, 19-year olds, 20-year olds like reading Nietzsche and being like all edgy kind of like fit because I was like because he talks about and I have 12 rules of life on my like bookshelf actually because I've read that whole book and he talks about how like happiness is fleeting and like you need like some sort of purpose and everything basically sucks and like I totally like resonated with that at the time. But yeah, so
I mean,
whenever I
there's
watch
something to
that,
that, right? Like,
yeah,
there's
well,
something to that.
that
That's one thing that I think the left is sometimes a little bit overly, like they're overly harsh in kind of trying to reduce Peterson to some like alt right, who has
I
no value.
totally
But yeah, I mean, I
agree.
think on the self help stuff, like he says some pretty uncontroversial things about I think he has an overly dark edge to things, and he often wants to spin things in this like the profound pain and sorrow of life, and you're always like, dude, like you need to, I don't know, maybe see
Bro.
someone. Like it's so dark. But I mean, he's also right that life is difficult and there's a lot of challenges, and those are like worthwhile insights, I suppose.
Yeah, that's actually when I talk to luckily the group that we have, which you talk to Mouthy, we have like a little like inner circle of us who are share some of the same opinions. And when we talk about Peterson, that's what me and Mouthy definitely, because we both have read Peterson, we found like at least some of his stuff helpful. And like those are the
Oh,
things that
cool.
helped me. We're kind of like the understanding that things are like gonna be bad. You're not gonna be happy all the time. And like coming to some sort of terms with that was super helpful, especially because during that time I was like on my own in college. I was like overwhelmed. So obviously I was dealing with some like mental health issues with like this like radically like living with my parents kind of thing to like completely being on my own, figure everything out yourself sort of thing. So it definitely helped me at the time. And I always tell people like I'm like, I know Peterson has some bad political takes, but I do think there's at least something you can get from him, especially like interpersonally, like mentally basically from him if like you really want to take that from him. Um yeah,
It's also true that there just aren't that many figures right now who are like public facing, who are like, I don't know, talking in a somewhat constructive way to like young men. Like, not that I think that he often leads young men in the wrong direction, probably, but also like there's not enough of people like constructively talking to young men in kind of like the leftist, certainly not in the leftist zeitgeist, I suppose.
Yeah, I totally agree, especially when you get like online. Oh my god. The online left
Yeah.
is so like, it I know like people are joking, but they'll be like really like they'll attack like men or something or like different like groups that are usually in places of power, which is understandable to critique, but like it ends up turning into like this almost like spiteful sort of thing. And if you're like a young dude, that's going to kind of push you away and like you're going to like I don't know, you'll find Jordan Peterson and then you'll get into all of his other beliefs and then you'll end up being more on like the right, which I always thought was like hurtful. I was like, we should be more, we can critique these things, but we should understand that we're critiquing like almost a systemic thing and not really like making personal attacks at these people because it pushes them away.
Yeah, I mean, you know what the online left is really bad at doing right now, and I guess online politics in general is like holding two truths in your mind at the same time, right? Like one is that like yeah, men have a systematic advantage in like the cultural value patterns of society, that like there are kind of unearned advantages, but at the same time there are like unique problems that affect men. And like both those things can be true, and there can be a way to like engage with both of those truths. And I think that too many people on the left like will, like it even just saying like maybe some young men need help, they're automatically going to be like, oh, you're like a men's rights creep or something like that, right?
Yeah,
It's like they
yeah.
immediately jump to that conclusion. And like and I think like nuanced politics, which is lacking, is about holding kind of like seemingly contradictory truths. And I think that's to be honest, I think that's kind of the task of theory and philosophy. It gives you the tools to be able to hold those truths in your mind at the same time and think about them and analyze them.
Yeah, that's I think that's super important. There's a joke that we have about like being nuanced because people like especially online like hate that. Like they cannot deal with like nuance. The moment you give an opinion, like I have this all the time. I'll like tweet something and someone will take the most like worst like misinterpretation of that and argue me about that. And I'm like, no, no, no. There is way more nuance to what I'm saying. I'm just making a quick little. It's Twitter. Like, come on.
Yeah.
If you really want to hear what I have to say, like further, like you can like message me. I can elaborate because like a lot of these issues, like you said, you can hold two truths about something. It's not like this black or white thing. Like you're like understanding there's problems with men doesn't mean like you're like pushing away like problems with for women or the rest of society, right? Like you can hold that these people have a place of privilege, but they also do have problems, and we can like
Exactly.
work on both those things. And I think that's like, yeah, I just think that's super important. And so especially on the on online politics is like missing, which is another thing I've really loved about y'all's podcast. I was listening to it for the first time, I think, and y'all joked about like Twitter lefties or something, which felt good because y'all's podcast is it's almost like reflective of what I think in a lot of ways, where I'm like really theory driven. I really like doing that. Obviously, I really like talking about practical stuff, like what policy we can actually get done. Um, But crap, I
Well,
just
I'm
totally
glad,
lost my
man.
train
Yeah.
of thought. Uh,
No, it's all good.
yeah, so like I loved that part, and then I loved the fact that y'all basically see the problems in that community that I always saw, that it's hard to talk to people about, especially online, because they're part of it, and then they'll like come at you for it. But it's like, no, 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 there's a real problem with how we deal with like online politics, and it's how our little community, me, Mouthy, we're probably the two that actually make the most content. But I think there's this guy named Cameron who does like a leftology podcast, and then a bunch of others that we argue with to like refine our thoughts with, and we're all the same way. Like we literally have in our Discord we have like dumb takes, like different like channels, and like one of them is dumb right takes, dumb lib takes, dumb lefty takes, and like we're probably putting in the dumb lefty takes as much as we put in like the dumb right takes because of that sort of thinking.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. That's interesting. So you guys, how long have you guys like been hanging out online, or like how did you guys find each other? I mean, I think because I'm like a generation older than you, it's interesting to hear about kind of like how people meet
Yeah, like
online and like spend more of their life online, right? Like even, I mean, obviously when I was growing up, like the internet was a big thing, but it just seems like there's way more people like Gen Z, right? Are like it seems like there's a lot more people spending a lot more time online and meeting people that way.
yeah, I mean, I totally have like actual friends that I've gotten from the internet, which is like really crazy because like I don't even think of them differently than my like friends that I have when I walk outside and like go hang out with someone. Like it feels the exact same. I think we've been talking for, dude, I don't know. It has to be. It's definitely over a year, maybe 2 years at this point. But initially how it started is I was watching Mouthy's content forever ago because when I first was coming to like the left, I like got into like Vosh, Destiny, those people, and through that I found Mouthy because I think Mouthy talked to Vosh or something. So I was like,
Mm.
while at work, listening to Mouthy's content, which is what blows my mind, is I went from this to us like talking on a daily basis. Was I was just watching him argue about the LTV and other like Marxist things against like libertarians or something, and then he
What's
opened it,
LTV again? Remind me. Remind
the
me.
labor theory of value. It's like a
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah,
economic
I got it.
principle. I don't really see
Yeah.
much
Yeah.
use in it, but
No, neither do I.
yeah, at the time I was like anything Marxist because I was like trying to get Marx because I noticed that all the people online that I engaged with would like talk about Marx, but then when you'd ask them further, that you'd realize that they didn't actually quite know. Um, and then I would get accused for not knowing Marx or something. So I was like, okay, you know what? I'm gonna go learn Marx. So whenever you say something to me, I know when you're wrong and I know what I'm talking about. So, but through that, he ended up making a Discord. We hopped in there, and then before too long, we created this. He had his Discord, and then we created a little inner circle of us that were in the Discord that like to talk a bunch, and then we made our own separate place to like talk to each other and whatnot. And then I don't know, it's been super helpful, I think, for all of our political like development because we're argumentative because it's fun. Like we'll like argue with each other. Someone says something, and we're like, that's not quite right, and then we'll have like a whole like brawl over it. And then through that, we kind of like figure out what position is either better or like just more correct at least. It's really cool. It's been like super helpful.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's cool. I mean, mostly, I mean, I talked to him for I think over an hour or something. I think his video is probably going to come, or the podcast, and he's going to release a video. I think probably next week at some point. But yeah, I mean, he's like a pretty smart guy, and I was pretty floored. I was telling you that he's only 18 because yeah, he seems to be a pretty careful thinker. Seems to be beyond his years in terms of his ability to think about different nuanced ideas. So yeah,
Yeah, I totally agree. When I watched his content, like I said, when I was at work, I was like, because at that time, I mean, he looks young and like, so to me, I was like, this kid is like so smart. Like, what the heck? Who is this? Like, I need to talk to this dude because he knew more about Marx than I did at the time. I was like, and he seemed so. I think he may have been like 16, 17 at the time. And I mean, like, he's arguing about the LTV with like the libertarians, and I'm like, who is this? Yeah,
yeah.
he's super smart. We have a bunch of other people that are younger in there too, and they're all like, I mean, they're all like super smart. We've all been us older ones are pushing them to like, actually study the things that they want to in school. Like, go, like, you guys have potential. Like, you're very intelligent people, and you're able to like come to your own conclusions, deal with nuance, and it's just super super impressive. Like, we even have two of them, this guy named Nicholas and this guy named Cam, who has a podcast. They both got the sublime object of ideology, and I'm like reading through it, but they're gonna start reading through it before too long, so then we can like talk about it. And I mean, these people are still in like high school, and I'm like, you're
That's
like,
cool, man. Yeah, it's gonna be hard though, dude. Like that, I was telling you before. Like you can, I mean, I just remember trying to read it in undergrad and like he just was referencing too many other people from the history of philosophy, where I
Yeah.
realized I was like, okay, I'm gonna have to wait. Like I'm gonna have to wait to know. And I remember I specifically did so when I did my undergrad at a university called Carleton in Ottawa, where I'm from, and it was a department that only had one professor who does like continental theory, and the rest were all analytic. If
Mm.
I'm assuming you're familiar with that
Yeah, yeah,
distinction,
yeah,
we
yeah.
probably talked about it. Yeah. So I just like would always go to her and be like, let's do an independent study because I wanted more continental
No,
theory.
yeah.
And I remember it was because of Zizek that I was like, okay, like we need to do Lacan. Like we have to do Lacan because I have to understand Lacan before I can get into like seeing what Zizek is doing, because he's just throwing around Lacanian this, Lacanian that, and I was
Yeah.
just like, I have no idea what he's referencing. And then but then of course you need to know Hegel too, which I'm still like, I feel like I'm a little weak on Hegel sometimes. I mean, I just haven't read all of the phenomenology of spirit and all those things, but yeah, I mean, I commend you for trying, and like, you know, you probably will be able to get, you know, I don't want to sound like I'm saying, you know, don't even try, like you should try. It's just, I'm just saying my experience was I was like, holy shit, I got to go back and kind of like read more of the history of philosophy.
Yeah, that's kind of my plan is I want to just get through it, see what I can get out of it, and then when I go back reading through the history of philosophy, I'll know like kind of what I'm looking for in a way I'm thinking. Like maybe it'll help me like guide what I'm reading and what I'm trying to get out of the reading. Obviously I'll get other stuff too, but I feel like it'll help me be more focused on like what I'm trying to get. And I totally agree though, like I was reading the preface and the introduction and I was like I have the first like 20 pages or whatever. I was like I haven't gotten anything out of this. Like I remember I walked into my roommate, who's also part of a like little group, and I was like, I've read 20 pages of this book. I have no idea what I read. It wasn't until like chapter one where because I've done a lot of research in Marx where he's like comparing things to Marx, like he's like talking about the mirror stage and he like reflects that towards Marx and how like commodities the way that objects are their relations are replacing the social relations, or at least that's what it appears
Yeah.
to be, you know. And from that, like how it's reflected, or I think he even used Hegel talking about like the subjects are only subject because of the king where the king's at, and the king's only king because he has subjects. So like through their reflection, they have their like
Right.
identity. And that,
Like a self-reinforcing effect or something.
yeah,
Yeah.
and that helped me get like at least the mirror stage of Lacan a little bit better. Like, cause okay, I kind of know what he's talking about, so I'm hoping I'll kind of at least have somewhat of an idea of some of these things through whenever he's relating things to like say Marx that I know, which has been sort of has been it. It's kind of what's helped me get through it. Is I'll be like when he does something using an example of Marx to reflect this other idea, I go like, oh wait, I kind of get what he's getting at. So I kind of am so glad that I learned a bunch of Marx to own a bunch of like lefties on the internet because it's been like super super helpful for that at least.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I mean, you know, it's funny how I think the online left has a tendency to just like throw around theorists, like, right, as if they know them that well. But then if you push them a little bit, you can tell that most of them, right, haven't actually made much of an effort. And I think, you know, that's maybe one of the differences. Or maybe, I mean, maybe that's why, like, I have no idea why our podcast, I mean, it's not super successful, but like, you know, I wonder whether that there was like an appetite for people who have actually like done some work to do the readings. And I guess like the online left has been maybe dominated by more people who don't have necessarily the formal education. I mean, I don't know, maybe that's wrong, but
Yeah, there's also I think on the online left, to me personally, it looks like there's a bunch of people who like want to be like they want to seem like really smart and like read in theory because they're like little because cliques get like formed on Twitter. I've noticed like little lefty like cliques in a weird way. So they'll pick like whatever theorist it is that they want to like pick, and it almost seems like they don't actually really engage with the theorist. They use it as like almost a like what is the word like a mascot almost for their like clique instead of really engaging. Like there's a bunch of people, for instance, that really like Deleuze on
oh
Twitter.
yeah,
And don't get me wrong, I haven't done much on Deleuze. The most I've gotten Deleuze is
neither have I.
from you guys, like from like PlasticPills is like videos on Deleuze. But I haven't personally done much on Deleuze. And I can tell most of these people like don't actually know what they're talking about when it comes to Deleuze. And then I'm also like, don't you need to have a bunch of background to like get to this point that you're reading like Deleuze that I can talk to them about other topics that I know that they don't have. And I'm like, how are you understanding like this? Like this person that is like super advanced that you probably want ground other like stuff to ground you for. So I almost feel like
Yeah.
there's just a bunch of like pseudo intellectuals on Twitter. Basically, that's what I call them because they make me so mad. Because I'll say something like something I've actually like read, and learned, and I'll tweet it or something, and then they'll like totally misinterpret what I said and then argue with me or something. And I'm like, you don't even know what you're talking about. Even though like, you got like Deleuze as your like profile picture. Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that's a good way of putting it. Pseudo intellectuals potentially on like dominating a lot of those circles. But yeah, I mean, I think having a formal education for me, like I almost feel like, and it's kind of cheesy because it goes back to Socrates. He says, I don't know if you've like done any of like the kind of reading the ancient philosophers,
Yeah, I've
but
read
like he's
all of Plato and all of Aristotle to get
oh,
started.
good, okay.
Yeah.
Cool. So like, yeah, that like Socrates, right? He asks the oracle like, who's the wisest person, right? And the oracle says you are, but he's like, but I don't know anything, right?
Yeah.
It's like he's the one who's aware of his ignorance.
Yeah,
And I
definitely.
think like the more education I do, the more aware of like my own ignorance I almost become. I mean, yesterday we were actually recording an episode about an article that Derrida wrote critiquing Foucault, and like I didn't really have that much time to read it carefully, but I don't know Derrida at all, and like I just felt like on that a lot of that podcast, like I don't say anything because I almost felt like one of those, when you're in class and you haven't really done your
You've done the
homework
reading.
properly. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
and like I did do the reading, but I don't have the background in Derrida because I think understanding what he was doing in that essay, I think maybe it was at least very helpful to have more of a background. So it's just funny that even now I almost feel more unsure sometimes, but in a good way. I don't know, maybe that sounds bad, but in a good way. You kind of realize and you're more comfortable with your ignorance the more educated you get, it seems to me, at least.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Like if I listen to like y'all's podcast or I listen to like a speech by Zizek or like um one of the other like groups I'll listen to about like theory, I will feel like beyond like ignorant. Like I'll realize like how much I don't know. And that's what's so funny to me about Twitter is I'll go on there and then I'm like, wait a minute. None of you people know like what you're talking about. So I feel I always am in this weird in between where I feel like smarter than or like more knowledgeable than most of the people I engage with online, but then I understand like how much knowledge I don't have. So at the same time, I feel insanely intelligent, but then also super super dumb. Like I'm like
Right.
always in this in
Because
between.
because knowing your own ignorance makes you realize that all these like really confident like ideologues on Twitter, like they if I don't know shit, like they definitely don't know what the hell they're talking about, and how could they be talking with such confidence, right? Like that's the thing that is kind of crazy, is like the amount of confidence that I was actually thinking about this the other day. Like I sometimes think that dogma or dogmatism is almost like is seems very related. I mean, this is obvious, I guess. Seems extremely related to like the level of confidence with which people have, right? It's like dogma enables you to be super confident about something. If you're That's like a sign. Like if you're ultra confident about what you're saying, that's like a sign of dogma, it seems to me, at least. And it just, so many people on the online left are giving these like super confident takes about whatever issue that they have, and you're just like, I don't know, it's a sign of maybe like lazy thinking. I don't know.
Yeah, I think this is something I think like very related is like people will pick like maybe they'll pick like Lenin or something and they'll read like a little bit of Lenin and they'll immediately take whatever they read as like true, or they'll get in one of those camps like I was talking about, like little cliques, like you got like the Marxist Leninist clique of people, and then they'll just take whatever any other Marxist Leninists say as like true, and it's like reinforces that dogmatism because they're all like saying, yeah, what you said is right, and then they never like question what they say, which sounds nice, honestly, but like at the same time, I don't want to be like that. Like I want to like actually get to like good conclusions about things and critically think about like whatever I'm like saying or putting out there or my opinions. Like I want them to be like really thought out instead of like just, oh, my buddy over here who also shares like whatever ideology or whatever like terminology I used to identify myself said this, so it must be true. Yeah, I would say it's definitely lazy thinking, and I imagine it's easy. I bet it feels good, but like, it definitely
That's
isn't like
crucial.
helpful. Yeah, I think that's what brings people to it because you get like a click, you feel accepted, and then you don't have to question anything anymore. So you feel like really comfortable. You're like, oh, I already know everything. I know the truth. Yeah, I think that's definitely
It's identity nourishing in a way, I
yeah,
think.
totally, totally. And me over here, I'm like, how are you so confident about that? Because I'm not even sure I agree with like the people that I'm interested in. Like even when I'm like reading, even with Zizek right now, like I was or when I'm looking into Lacan, I was explaining the big other to someone recently from Lacan because it's one of the concepts I actually think I kind of understood. And as I'm like
Yep.
explaining it, like I'm like, this seems to be correct. This seems to be true, but like I'm still questioning it. Like I don't just wholeheartedly like agree with Lacan. Like I'm like, well, is that like, do I actually? Is there any way I can like argue against that? Maybe like I never just take something for like its word. I'm like, this is an interesting idea, and maybe I can see if it like actually materializes itself somewhere. Like I think Zizek uses a good example about like I think he also talks about the TV laughing for you sort of thing, or like you stub your toe and you say like ouch out loud, and it's because there's the presence of like the big other. So you're because you don't have to say ow, you could just say it in your head, but you
Right.
audibly say it for like what reason, and the reason is the big other or whatever. Um, which I think
Yeah,
is like
or
super
even
interesting.
even the way that we imagine, when we're walking down the street, we're always thinking about what we must look like to some imaginary audience in a
Yeah,
certain
yeah. You're
sense.
like you're never like really alone, even though you are alone. Um, which is I don't know. I just thought it
But
was so
there's a
interesting.
tendency to think about there's a tendency to think about like how you would look to the other. And I think actually, like, I don't know if this will be helpful, but I remember when I was first learning the big other, I remember and at the time I was in undergrad and going to classes and seminars, and I remember thinking like how there's a certain feeling you get when you first walk into a classroom where like you're kind of like shit, like do I even belong here, like am I, and like you see everyone else and you kind of get the sense like they all know what they're supposed to be doing and you don't or
Yeah,
something.
yeah,
And like, so I remember thinking like that was a bit of a helpful way for me to think like that's kind of like the big other. It's like kind of assuming that that all these other people know what they're supposed to be doing, and you're just like kind of like feeling exposed and unsure, and like the one who doesn't understand anything.
yeah, yeah. I
But the truth is everyone there is like unsure and
yeah, they're all
awkward.
the exact same, and they're all like
Exactly.
thinking the exact same. Yeah, because of the like
Exactly.
concepts like that I do think like ring true. It's why I've actually gotten like really interested in Lacan. Which, by the way, super thankful for your recommendation. I got like a PDF of it and I was like reading some of it. And I haven't got too far in it yet because obviously I'm reading the Sublime Object of Ideology, but I read a little bit of it and it was way more accessible than most I've read about Lacan, other than like I think Pills has like a video on it that I've like watched like probably like 12 times. um but that
The
text
Bruce
that
Fink.
um yeah, and then the yeah, that text was super helpful. It was super good. I was like
Cool.
talking about how great it is that I've got in contact with you because I'm like I have someone who can like actually recommend me like stuff now because I'm out here on my own trying to figure this stuff out because obviously I'm not like in school learning about it. So I was like, this is super helpful to have someone who
Yeah, for
knows what they're
sure.
talking about, be able to like reference to me like things that are accessible and actually have like good nuggets in there. So I'm not starting from like oh I'm gonna go try to take on like all the seminars of Lacan like right now or like
Oh,
something.
definitely don't.
Yeah,
Definitely
yeah,
don't. Are you referring to the book, the clinical introduction, or the Lacanian subjects? I think I
the
recommended two.
the clinical introduction because I think you said
Oh
that
yeah,
one first because it had examples in it, which were like super helpful, which I was
yeah. I
glad
really
about.
like that book. I also find the examples of therapy like kind of juicy. Like they're just really interesting to hear the stories of. I don't know how far you got into it, but if you get a chance, it's like really interesting because he'll talk about like his own practice, right? Like Fink is a practicing Lacanian analyst, so he talks about like how what it's like to treat people and like how he connects the theory to like understanding the actual symptoms that his patients are kind of presenting with, right? And I
Yeah,
find that really interesting.
yeah, that's what I think is super helpful. Because examples always have helped me, and I think Zizek has a really cool like thing about examples. I was listening to the Zizek and So On podcast like literally just a few days ago, and he was talking about why he always uses examples, and it's because he says that he kind of does like a reverse of the Platonic like idea of the world of forms or whatever, where like there's more truth in like the thing in the world of forms than like in material reality. And he goes, no, there's more truth in the idea in the material reality, um, which is why he uses examples, which is also gets to why those examples are probably so like helpful because there's
Yeah.
more truth about the theory within the example than just the straight theory itself. Um,
Right.
so yeah, I was super excited about that. Also, thinking about examples like that was super cool because I read something Zizek like wrote not too long ago, and he was talking about materialism, and he said like it's like materialism beyond matter or something. It's like it sounds like he's almost describing something like transcendental, but he doesn't. He just says it's like matter with an idea. And I was like, what does this mean? Like it's a whole paragraph. So like I read it and I was like, I can't decipher any of this. And then after that podcast, he said that, and then I understood what he was getting at, and then it made me like realize why examples I think are so helpful, because there's something more true in the example than just the pure like theoretical like side of things. So if you can
Yeah,
find
for
a
sure.
way to put that in examples, I think most people can like grasp it easier, especially for me. I know that. So whenever you said that text had examples, I was immediately like, okay, I'm gonna grab that and I'm gonna dive into that because I think that'll be super helpful.
Yeah, it's good. I think he's my favorite interpreter of Lacan for sure. Like English speaking, I think he's kind of considered one of the best. But yeah, I mean, I feel like maybe did I take us off track here a little bit? I don't know if you had like some specific questions you wanted to ask, or
Uh,
I mean, I don't
I
know.
had I had something. I wrote down just a little bit of stuff. Let me see if I can pull it back up.
Sure.
Um, hold on one
I
second.
mean, I got more questions. I'm curious about things, so
Yeah, give me. We see. I had no idea what I wanted to talk about. I was just like, okay.
no,
I was
that's cool,
like,
man. Well, when you're looking, like, I mean, I was kind of curious before because you did say a little bit about kind of grown up in conservative context and then sort of like shifting. So what I'm curious, I'm always curious, like what is that first thing that sort of started moving you in a different direction? I know you said that you watched like some Vosh and Destiny, but was there something before that, or was that one of the causes of your shift, or what happened with that?
yeah. So you know the whole like saying like I was radicalized by life and not like theory. It was definitely like that because I was basically put on my own. I thought I was gonna be like supported through college, and then that didn't really happen. I mean, they didn't completely abandon me, but it definitely was like way less so than what I was told I was gonna get. So I had to figure out everything myself. And at one point, I was living at this apartment, and I wasn't making enough money to make get by. So they were evicting me, and then they were suing me for the money that I owed them. Um,
Jesus.
so I was like I got out of it, but I had to work like a ton. Like I mean, I was like working 70-hour weeks, like while in school, to get it paid off. And I was just like, there is something wrong with how things are. Like this should not happen. Like this is not okay. And I think from then on, I was just like looking for like some solution because it's like, okay, I totally understand now when people like feel like stuck. And when I was conservative, it's like, if you're poor, it's because of bad decisions or whatever. And I was like, I haven't made any bad decisions really. I just got dumped out here and I've been doing my best. So after coming to that realization, I just started like going like, I think I heard Yang talk about
Mhm.
UBI or something. And I was like, dude, that'd be super helpful. And then from
Yeah.
then on, I was just like, okay, let me check out Bernie Sanders. And then I was like, Bernie Sanders is talking about socialism or whatever. And I was like, huh, maybe socialism doesn't sound that bad. And then I like got into the internet side of things and just kept like learning more. And then it basically happened from there. It was just from a personal experience of like understanding how like ruthless, I guess, our how capitalism can be basically, and like
That's
understanding that we need
interesting.
we need some way to like help people in whatever way we possibly can, which has also been why I'm super pragmatic, because like a lot of people are like revolution only, we got to get everyone to do the revolution. I'm like, we don't, not everyone wants to do that, and there's people like out there like how I was, like really struggling, like, and doing really bad. Like it really sucks to be in that position. It is probably the most stressful situation I've ever been in my life. Because what, you think you're going to be out on the streets, or maybe you already are, and it's like we should be helping those people like right now. Like what can we do now? Not wait for everyone to be class conscious or whatever your argument is, which I think most people actually kind of are class conscious, but that's another tangent. But we don't need to wait for some revolution to happen. We need to help these people like now, and I don't think most people want to even partake in that revolution, so it's not going to happen. So let's figure out who we can support, and like electoral politics, what we can do outside of that to help these people. And then from then on, I just like I got my stuff back together. I was good. And then from then on, I was like, okay, I'm gonna learn everything I need um, to act effectively politically. Um, and then from then, I got like really into theory because I was like, oh, there's like philosophy behind this, and I've always been like interested in like philosophical things even when I was a kid. So then the realizing philosophy is actually dips into a lot of left wing stuff like was super good for me, because then I became a huge nerd and was like, I'm gonna
Mhm.
eat all this stuff up.
Nice. No, that's a great story that, that life radicalized by life or whatever. And it's funny. I mean, I heard you mention, right, that I guess you thought maybe your parents were going to help out a little bit more with school. And I'm just making an assumption here that your parents are a little bit more conservative. So I guess I find it kind of amusing that by them not giving you the help that maybe you were expecting, you turned into a left winger.
Yeah, my dad always talks about how my school turned me into a liberal or whatever, and I'm like, no, Dad, the reason why I'm a lefty is actually because I had to figure out everything on my own, and then I realized because of that, the problems I had to deal with, the like social like systematic issues that we have that I suffered from, and so actually, thank you, you're the one who radicalized me, not my school. It was funny.
Yeah, I like that.
I took a small time off of school, like a semester, which is why I graduated a little later. Um, and it was during that time is whenever I became like left. Like it actually wasn't when I was in school at all. So it had nothing to do with my like university radicalizing me because it was all on. I wasn't even in school at the time.
Right. Right. So, you said you went to a state school, I guess, like in Texas, but it was away from your parents. So you had to like live on your own and
Yeah,
stuff and figure everything out.
I'm like 5 hours away. So like totally it in Texas it's so big. I mean, I could practically be in a different state. Like 5 hours is a long drive. I don't know
No,
how
for
many
sure.
miles that is. I think it's like 330 miles or something.
Oh, dude, well, why are you? Oh, miles, right? It's funny that you're talking. Were you talking in kilometers?
No, no, I was saying I said 5 hours. I was talking in
Oh,
time.
five
So then I
hours.
was
Right,
like,
right.
well,
Sorry. Okay,
not
my bad.
everyone does that. So I was like, I may maybe mention how far in miles. Yeah,
Right. Miles. Yeah, yeah. Of course,
kilometers.
Canadians we use kilometers.
That's a
So
good
that's why
point.
for a second I thought you said kilometers, but I just got confused there for a second.
It's
Yeah, no, that is far. That is, I mean, 5 hours. Yeah, that's definitely that's like driving from Toronto to Montreal or something, which is pretty
yeah.
far cross province.
So basically, I was like totally out on my own island, sort of thing. So it wasn't like I could just move back in with my parents or anything. It was like I'm gonna be living in my car, or something like that. But as much as that
That's
was
crazy.
difficult, I was kind of glad that it happened because it got me where I am now, doing what I do now. Now I feel at least somewhat educated when it comes to like leftist politics. I feel like good enough that I can obviously make content. That's what I'm doing right now. And I wouldn't be able to do that without that experience. So as much as I don't want anyone else to go through that experience, I am kind of grateful in a weird way for that experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the challenges are like a crucial part of life, I think. But yeah, do you have a job in graphic design now? Because like as a result of that also, or are you just trying to focus on making content right now, or what's sort of your plan?
So I just graduated, so I'm still working at a pizza place, which is terrible. I did apply for one graphic design job. I was thinking about possibly getting a teacher certificate because a lot of places around here they do like media electives for like their high school kids, and I figured that could be kind of a easy job that gives me tons of time off, which is what I really want
Mhm.
because I want to be able to focus on. I would love to make this the thing that I do. If I could make content, like making content the thing that I do, that would be the dream because then I'd be able to read my books, talk about stuff, and what I really if you watch my like I'm back video, I talked about how I really wanted to talk about theory and stuff on my channel, and that takes like a lot of work. Like it takes like reading it, actually understanding it, writing stuff down about it, to be able to like regurgitate back, like to break it down for people. Um,
Totally.
so whatever I do, I want to make sure I have plenty of time to do that because I'm definitely more passionate about this than like anything else. Even like design work, like that's fun, but this is what really matters to me.
Right, for sure. And I wonder, did your design like education have any like applicability to editing videos or no, not
Oh
really?
yeah, yeah. So when I first did like design work, I started in high school and I actually started doing audio video. So because of that and then doing further design work, I mean I'm able to like I make my own thumbnails, I can make them pretty easy, like really quickly. It takes me like 5 minutes. I can edit my own videos. I figured out how to wire. I use a DSLR, like I have a fancy camera that I can use. So yeah, it's totally helped and prepared me for this. So in a weird way, I still use the skills from that, which is like awesome. So like everything that I did learn in school, I can still use doing this, which so in a way it supports my passion basically.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's funny I mean, it's really all thanks to pills that I'm involved in this space at all. I would have never it would have never even occurred to me to be a content creator. Like that thought never even really entered my mind. He just kind of invited us, some of his friends from like from school
Mm-hmm.
to participate, who, because we just were drinking buddies basically. We just liked hanging out at when we all went to at one point when I was doing my master's, I was at the same university as them, and we would just drink at the campus bar all the time and just like talk about philosophy and stuff. And
And you're
yeah,
just
he
like,
just
let's
kind of
record
invited.
this sort of thing.
Well,
Like,
yeah, I mean, at some point down the line, like later, I mean, I think, yeah, it was before the pandemic when it started. And I remember him just calling me one day, being like, "Hey, Victor, like I think I kind of want to do a podcast, and I was just like, oh man, like that sounds impossible, like an impossible hill to climb. Like I don't know, like if you want, I would participate." And I remember him like he kind of wanted to frame it as like, not that we like I'm not like the biggest fan of Chapo Trap House, but initially he kind of wanted to have like that vibe but be more like theory. And I don't know if we really succeeded in that. I feel like we ended up becoming something kind of totally different. But yeah, and I had to go and listen to the Chapo Trap House because I never, like, that's how out of touch I was with kind of like online anything,
yeah,
right? I was just and then I discovered more of the online world as a result of kind of being more involved in the space, but like I didn't know any of the stuff at all. So it's kind of funny, like how it ended up. I mean, it's not big, but like I think we get around 2,000 listens. Obviously, his channel, which we kind of have nothing to do with, he does that all himself, which is a monumental amount of work. I think he's been working on his last video for like the past 3 months and is kind of
oh my god.
banging his head against the table trying to get it finished. But yeah, so it's been interesting to, and I guess, oh yeah, I remember what I wanted to say about that is just like one thing that I find kind of interesting, even as small as we are now, is just like, or what I interesting and what I kind of feel very uncomfortable with is like the way I'm noticing that my own, like the way that I feel vulnerable to critique in a way that I never like cared to be, like in a sense, like just the way people react, like reading comments.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't like that my self-esteem can be in any way affected by just like what people comment on. And I find that a very strange thing that I didn't really expect or think about much, right?
Yeah, I think that's one of the most difficult things about like putting out content. First, I'm super glad y'all did it. It's been super helpful for me. I mean, I deliver pizza, so I'm in the car. Um
Sure.
so like I just listen to either if I don't want to listen to music, I'm listening to a podcast, and half the time it's y'all's podcast. Or recently it's been like Zizek and so on because I've been like reading the Sublime Objective Ideology. So to help with that, I'm like reading them, which listening to them, which Matt was actually on, which I thought was like super cool. He's like on one of their
Oh, was he?
episodes.
That's
Yeah.
funny.
And I was like, oh look, the worlds are colliding over here. But yeah, I'm so glad that that worked out. And um I don't think I'll give too much of the Chapo Trap House vibe, but I think that's a good thing. Like I think y'all come off like way more reasonable. Y'all seem like y'all know what y'all are talking about more so. But obviously I'm biased. I'm not the biggest fan of Chapo Trap House. Um which is actually really related to the comments thing. So I made a video. It's probably my biggest video. It has like I think it has like 2,500 views or something, where I critique Brianna like Joy Gray or Gray Joy, whatever the heck her last
Oh
name
yeah,
is.
I'm not a fan of her at all.
Yeah, and it's with her and Virgil, and they're talking
I'm not a fan of
about
him at all
yeah.
either.
Well, he's who I think about when I think about Chapo because he's like one of the people that was on there. I think. And they were like debating with Chomsky, like almost they were saying we're not
Oh
saying
yeah.
not to vote for Biden, but we kind of like are because he's not getting rid of capitalism. And Chomsky's like, hey, the world is like gonna be on fire. Okay, like maybe get something better than Trump, and then we can focus on like de- destroying capitalism or whatever.
Yeah,
But I
exactly.
critiqued that video because I was like, they're framing this so weird, and like so I wanted to make something, but I was like, this is too good. I gotta go after this. Even though I try to mainly focus on right wingers, this needs to be like stomped out. So I'm gonna take part in helping stomping this out. Um, and yeah, I got a ton of negative comments. Like, I mean, I got more positive than negative because luckily my like the people I associate with that get to see my content are like minded to some degree. But there was definitely tons of like negative comments, and yeah, that can really like mess with your head, and it makes it like nerve
Yeah, and it's
wracking
not
to
and
put something out.
it's not even just like the negative comments too. Like the thing that I don't like in myself, that it's like this weird development, is like I'll find myself going and checking the comments, right? Like the fact that there's like that there can be almost like this strange sort of like libidinal effect where all of a sudden like I just want to go and see what people said, and it's just like ugh, like I don't
Yeah,
know,
it's
I
like
don't want to care.
self-torture because like okay, I have
Yeah,
like the YouTube Studio app on my phone, which allows me to like see my analytics, see my comments and all that. And I'll go on there like in the middle of the day and just like see if someone's commented something. And it's like, why do I do this? Like I should just put stuff
yeah,
out and then like let it get whatever it gets and like walk away from it. I put out my piece. People can say whatever they want. But I always
yeah.
end up checking it, which is whenever I saw like, oh my god, people are really mad about this video.
I think everyone does. It's just it's just funny to kind of like think about it. I sometimes make myself cringe, you know, when I think
Yeah,
about like
yeah.
how many times I went to check. Like Matt and I went on this like really far left podcast, The Vanguard. I don't know if you've heard of them. They've been kind of getting bigger, and the two dudes are like really nice. I like them, but their audience, holy shit, like they just called Matt and I like libs and centrists, and they're
Oh, you
like,
gotta
"Get these
love it.
centrists out of here." And I was like, and then and then I'm looking at the comments later, and I'm just like, "Oh, why am I doing this?"
Yeah, because they all come out and dude, the lib insult. Oh my. Anytime
I
I'm
know.
talking to someone on some lefty on Twitter, I'll like say something about like electoralism or like reform, and all of a sudden like I'm a lib, and I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, obviously, I mean, this is this actually segues really well into liberal socialism, which I think you and Matt did like an excellent job at like breaking down and presenting. Like when I listened to that podcast, I was like, I didn't know what to call myself at all. And I don't think I like you have to have a label, but it definitely helps when someone's like, what are your beliefs, and you can at least give something, they can have some sort of idea. I was always stuck in this weird in between because I was like, obviously, like I'm a socialist, right? Like there's bad parts to capitalism. I would always struggle with being like a post-capitalist, right? Like I'd be like,
Mm,
we need to get past this over time. But like the way we do it is we actually do need some aspects of capitalism to exist for things like growth and whatnot to then be able to afford the things that we want to do. So then it became the joke that I was a capitalist communist. Like I was like pro capitalism in order to get communism. But like obviously that was like a meme and like it wasn't serious. So I like didn't have anything to call myself. And then when y'all broke that down, I was like, this is so perfect. Like this is like literally what I'm gonna go by now. Especially when y'all talked about how it was like the enlightenment values being like kind of expanded or like pushed further um through like more socialistic ideas, and I was like, yeah, I mean that's what I'm for. Like the reason why I'm for socialism is for that. So like like things like liberty are expanded whenever you have the financial stability to do that, to engage in that. And when you don't have that, well, what kind of liberty do you have if you're poor? Um, so when y'all broke that down, I thought that was really cool, especially using like Marx and Hegel, which a bunch of lefties will talk about. I was like, oh my god, this is grounded within like leftist, like lefty shit. I was like, so I can argue this with people, and they won't just call me a centrist. And if they do, they just don't know what they're talking about. So I thought that was like
exactly.
super awesome.
Yeah, I'm glad you liked that episode. I remember that was a fun one to record because it got a little bit heated. Like
Yeah.
Eric and Pills are a little bit more. I mean, they're not like the thing is like they don't spend as much time thinking about like political philosophy. Like they obviously have some political leanings, and I mean they're on the left, but you know, like I mean, not that they didn't know what they were talking about. I mean, they did. It was just kind of a nice like I thought it was a nice dynamic where Matt and I were kind of trying to defend this liberal socialism, and I think they tend to be a little bit more critical of just politics in general, and like and actually it came up yesterday when we were talking about Derrida, how it's sometimes, I don't know if you've come across this yet or thought about this yet, but I think one of the things about continental theory is that sometimes it gets so fixated on undermining every sort of structure of society as being like power or being, I don't know, ultimately untenable because it's based on, like, I don't know, Foucault is a good example, right? Where everything just ends up being reducible to power to a certain extent. Obviously, there's like better and more generous readings of Foucault, but ultimately, I think continental theory can have this problem where because it's so fixated on criticizing like kind of like preconceptions and assumptions that we have in society and like sort of things that we value, that it almost leads to this attitude where like to say that I'm a liberal, it's like you're trying to put your thumb on something and make it real, and like continental theory kind of keeps on showing you that all these things are contingent and they're not really real and like you can't locate them. So it can kind of lead to this strange situation where like you're skeptical of everything, if
Yeah.
that makes sense.
No, totally. Because okay, when that happens, I'll be talking to someone. I'm trying to figure out like what should we do? Like what is the action that we should be taking? And you'll have like that sort of like um criticism of like everything in that way, like and it's like, okay, well then what do you want? And then these people don't have like any positive
Yeah.
solution on like what we should do. And it's like it's fine to critique things, and I think that's good, but like, and I don't think you necessarily have to have all the answers to like what we should do, but you should at least have some sort of side of like what sort of action should we be like heading towards. And it seems like a lot of people that engage like that end up pointing at some sort of almost ethereal society that I can't even picture. Like it's like transcends anything that I can possibly imagine existing in like reality. And I'm always
Well, it
just like,
seems yeah.
it's like
It
what do you
seems
want?
sorry.
You're good. Go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. What do you want? I mean, it seems impossible to it almost I mean, sometimes I connect it to like what I would call like purity politics, where it's like you don't want to be contaminated by anything. So, it's like because everything is like complicit in power structures, right? So, you say like, oh, I'm a liberal, but like, oh, liberalism is complicit with neoliberalism or like whatever, and like colonialism, and it's like, yeah, that's like true, but there's a way of taking the parts of liberalism that I think people all mostly intuitively like want to preserve, and like even if they don't admit that they want to preserve, like they actually do when you watch like the kind of commitments that they have. And I just find that yeah, it's like because I think it feels good, and this is actually where you could maybe connect this phenomenon to like Lacanian psychoanalysis and just sort of like pleasure and jouissance. And I think people really like, it feels righteous and nice to be like, I'm not going to contaminate myself with anything, right? I'm just going to be pointing out how everything is complicit with all these power structures. But then, like you said, I mean, and this is actually a question that I posed yesterday when we were recording the Derrida podcast. It's like, well, what's the connection between this and praxis, like action? Like, what are we supposed to do then if like
Yeah.
everything is just shit? So yeah, I
Yeah,
agree.
it seems like there ends up being like no solution. I'm like, well then like what, I get that you can kind of do commentary for commentary, right? But like what's the purpose of your criticisms? Like what are you trying to like achieve by making this criticism? Like how are you going to make the world like better in some way? And half the time it doesn't seem like there's any answer, and I get like super frustrated with people that will like engage with me and tell me that I'm a lib or something because I'm trying to come up with actual ways to do things. And I'm like, but you don't have anything. At least I'm over here like I'm reading the stuff that you're reading, but at least I'm trying to think about how we can make things better at the same time. Like even if it's in like a liberal framework or like whatever, like I don't care. I want to make things better. That's what I'm focused on. And I think that to an extent, as much as you can engage with any sort of like critique, you should also be having like a side of you that's like, okay, what can we at least make better? Like even if say like this dynamic of some kind is terrible, well, how can you make the terrible dynamic at least like somewhat better if you can't get rid of it or something? Um,
Yeah,
which
exactly,
it
exactly.
most people don't seem to have like an answer to. They just point to like some sort of ethereal, like I found this with Orthodox Marxists a lot when I would like talk to them. They'd almost point to like some sort of ethereal society that doesn't seem like it could exist, and it's not like because it's too utopian. It's just like, and like no one has to work. You get everything that you need. And all these like things that seem to contradict if you were to have these exist. Like, well, how can everyone get everything they need if no one has to work? Like, we
Yeah,
need
yeah,
like,
exactly.
and they'll be like, oh, well, it'll work, and then they'll go on some tangent, and it just seems like to me they're pointing to some sort of ethereal society that has everything fixed, like everything's totally fixed, and I'm like, how? Like, and I think actually this is what I've been finding interesting with Hegel. And I heard on the Zizek and So On podcast, I can't remember the guy's name, but he's very close to like Zizek and what he does, where he mixes like Hegel and Lacan. And he said one of his criticisms of Marx is that Marx's like conception of society, like communism, at least how he conceives of it, is like the end of the dialect, the end of the contradictions. And it's like, well, if you're like really taking Hegel, that can't happen. Like that's not how the world works. There's always contradictions. And I almost feel like when I'm talking to these people, the society they want is one without that. And if,
Oh
which
yeah.
they may disagree with Hegel or whatever, but if you agree with things that Hegel have to say, that's like impossible. Like there will be like contradictions. And there's no like way we can get to this ethereal society with no contradictions like whatsoever.
Yeah, no, I mean, I strongly agree. You almost are anticipating something that I was going to say, which, but I would use slightly different language. Like, but I mean, contradictions is right also. But I think, often there's this dream that we can get rid of all alienation, right? All alienated
Yeah.
structures, right? And it's like that's kind of like it's almost like the kind of Marxist, and this also is kind of a problem. Well, I don't know, I don't necessarily a problem, but an observation I make about like the online like anarchist space too, where
Oh
they're always
God.
talking about like getting rid of all alienated structures, like everything. They want to have direct, where you are directly choosing the terms of your existence and there's nothing between you and the world. And I guess, one of the things that I think is like, I mean, I won't be able to explain this fully here, but I think Lacanian psychoanalysis and Hegel, I mean, you're right that this is in Hegel, I think, is that like a part of the human condition is like a kind of alienation. It's like it's inescapable. It's like the fact that we even have language, right? Like to communicate, like like one of Lacan's points, right, is that like language is there's always a leftover, right? Like when you define something with a word, a signifier, like it can't capture every single instantiation. There's always like a leftover. There's an imperfection between like the symbolic representation of the world and then reality, which is like the real. And
Yeah.
it's there's always going to be some alienation. You're always going to be alienated because there's a mediation between you and reality. And I think like the same goes for the way that we decide to live together, or in other words, politics, right? Like there's always going to be some leftover, no matter how we try. You just can't get. I mean, it's just it's naive, in my opinion, and foolish to think you can get rid of all alienated structures. It's almost like a like. But as you said, and I think I'm oriented the same way. Let's just focus on things that we know are actually going to make people's lives better, like that we can identify. That is not just, as you say, ethereal, but like that we can actually, that's not vague, at least, right? That you can actually put your finger on.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, Zizek has a really cool thing. This is one of the things before I read him at all. That I listened to. It was like a plea for bureaucratic socialism.
Oh
And I
yeah, I like that
use
one.
I use one of his arguments against like the anarchists that talk about that, because he says something like about how not all alienation is inherently like bad.
Bad,
He's like
exactly.
it doesn't have to be bad. He's like, I don't want like direct democracy necessarily. I don't want to have to go to like these meetings every day and like vote on things I don't care about. I want to sit in my home and I want to read my books. Like, leave me alone.
Exactly.
And I always like, I was talking to do you know who Socialism Done Left is?
Yeah, I think I've heard of them. Yeah.
He's a little bit smaller than like Vosh and whatnot, but he's kind of like sort of sort of big in like, at least in the content creative state. And we talked about representative democracy versus direct democracy, and I was like, I actually used that argument. I was like, I don't think most people like want to have to be, because we were talking about voting directly on policy. I was like, I don't think most people want to have to be educated enough to like be able to read a whole policy, understand everything that's in it. I think like we want to delegate that to like someone. We want to be able to have a
Yep.
say on how that comes out, but we don't want to have all the knowledge necessary to be able to write that policy basically ourselves. Like I want to go do other things. Like I want someone to do that job for me. So like some not only can you not escape alienation, I don't think we even want to get rid of all of the alienation. I think some of it is super helpful to
Oh,
letting
I
us do
totally
other
agree.
things. So yeah, that's one of the conclusions that, for as an example, that I really like that Zizek got to, and I was like, how does he get here? Like what's his way of thinking? Because I totally agree. Um,
Yeah, I mean, I'm the same way. I mean, I remember when I did my master's. I did a master's in urban planning, actually, in a department called environmental studies. But not everyone there was a planning student. But there were kind of like more environmental students, and a lot of them were kind of like environmentalist anarchists.
oh
And I
lord,
remember like having arguments with them because they would have all these cringy arguments about like, localism, and we can have town councils where everybody in the neighborhood goes and meets. And I was just like, that sounds like a fucking nightmare. And I also came across the same Zizek video. So
it's just
yeah, that resonates with me
it's
too.
so helpful. Because actually at one point when I was first getting into leftism, I like, because I was like conservative or whatever. There is like this sort of anti-government sort of, even though it's not truly anti-government within the right, they'll act like they are, but like, they'll support things that are big government, just not the things that lefties want, right? So whenever I first came to the left, I did like dip into the like sort of anarchist sort of thought, and then I was engaging with the idea of like the state, because they want to abolish like the state, and I'm like, is that even like really possible at all? And I was like, I don't think so. Like I seem like this is like some, because anytime you ask them what the alternative is, they'll give some sort of like really localized like democracy or something, like communes, for example. And I'm like, well, don't those communes have like a state? Like isn't the the apparatus that all the decision making gets through and the way that's enforced, isn't that just like a state? You just want like a bunch of tiny states. Like to me, you're not like dissolving the state. It's still there. And after I came to that realization, I was like, okay, this stuff's like whack. Like I was like, there's I can't deal with this because what you're pointing to seems to be impossible, and every alternative that you give is not doing the thing that you think it's doing. And then from there, I kind of was more like, well, this state can actually be a good thing. And I think like
Yeah.
because of the way, like if we look at like like I was talking about like the alienation, the way that the state can actually do that in a good way. It can take certain decisions. Obviously we want some sort of input on, but we don't have to do all of like the policy writing or be super knowledgeable on exactly how, like, say we want to get universal healthcare, how the healthcare system completely works. Like we can know that we want this more broad thing, and then we can allow the state to make that happen and then enforce it. So like that was
Yeah,
a big
no.
like turning point. And then Zizek's video on that, his way of talking about socialism, I think is like super good. And I use it quite a bit. I did have one question.
Oh yeah, for sure, man.
And I think you and Matt were helping with a book that's actually talking about this. But how do you deal with people who say that liberal socialism is like a contradiction? Like they say liberalism and socialism are antagonistic towards one another. Because anytime I say I'm a liberal socialist, I have to always explain how it isn't. But I was just curious on like how you may go about doing that.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, I think I think that they're wrong when they say that like liberal socialism is and there's a bunch of people I could point you to who talk about this. So, I mean, I know that I've seen Ben Burgess actually talk about this a little bit, that, that actually you can find in Marx quite a lot of arguments that are very similar to like John Rawls, who you might be familiar with, right?
Yeah.
Who's like a liberal, um, but so he considers himself a liberal. He wants to uphold individual rights, and I guess maybe we should also be clear. I mean, I get like the problem is there's so much slippage about what the word liberal means, right? So I mean, I guess in my mind, like it means that you'd have some kind of regard for like some kind of individual rights that are kind of secured constitutionally, or in some sense. I mean, that's at least one way of thinking about it. And I think you can actually find quite a lot of um, what's the word, resources in Marx for supporting that he did actually support something that would be called liberal rights. So there's actually a guy called Igor Shkoikebrod. I can maybe send you. He wrote a book recently called like Marx and Rights, and he's a Marxist. I think we interviewed him on the PillPod at one point way back, and his whole book was actually about like how you can find rights in Marx, basically. So I think that a lot of people misread. They think liberalism. First of all, I think when people are hostile to liberalism, they often think or are very quick to conflate, oh, if you're a liberal, then you must be for capitalism as it is, or you must be for neoliberalism and globalization. And I think like, I just don't think that that's true. I think that like, having individual rights of some sort that are secured by some kind of state apparatus is not inconsistent with socialism, or like leftism, which I kind of see as some kind of commitment, or at least prioritizing, right, societal well-being and human flourishing for everybody, right? And I think like having a leftist socialist perspective just means being oriented and saying that that probably there are a lot of structures in the society that interfere with the ability for everybody to flourish, right? And one of them being poverty, severe inequality, and I think like concentrated political and economic power. I think those things get in the way, and I think you're a socialist if you think that those things need to somehow be overcome and that we need mechanisms to overcome those things. But I don't think that in any way means that you also have to reject liberal rights or liberalism per se. I don't know. Hopefully that's helpful.
No, yeah, I totally agree. I also think as much as like people conflate, like you said, liberalism with like neoliberalism. Like anytime I say like liberal socialism, that's usually why they think it's a contradiction, because they think when they hear the word liberal, they immediately think of neoliberalism. I'm like, do you know what liberalism is? Like what liberalism actually is, not just what neoliberalism is. And usually through explaining that, it'll make like more sense to them. And a way I like to really explain it too is it's kind of like the core, like a lot of core ideas behind liberalism. Um, Obviously being anti-capitalist because of socialism. It's more like achieving the goals that we wanted through liberalism through a socialist approach is how I always think about it. It's like the sort of like equality, liberty and things like that, but achieving it through like more of a socialistic like approach. And I think that's the best way I've been able to like at least describe it in a really easy way without like, talking someone's ear off for like an hour trying to explain it.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think it's interesting. The other side of the question too is like, what do we really mean by socialism, right? And it's and that's where I think there can be some contestation. I think we saw this in that like super unproductive debate between Destiny and,
And Richard
Richard
Wolff.
Wolff.
Oh yeah.
Like about how we're going to define it. And I'll say even like my doctoral supervisor right now, I wrote a chapter or a paper actually. It's going to appear in Matt's edited volume that I think he was tweeting about today. But and I was making this argument for a certain kind of democratic mechanism and how it would probably be consistent with both liberal and socialist values actually. And I remember my doctoral supervisor, like some of the feedback she gave me was, well, to some people, socialism has to mean that the means of production are owned collectively or by the state. And like, so yeah, it's true. So I guess it's true that um because, and I guess maybe you and I differ here, but I don't necessarily think that market mechanisms or private ownership is kind of like prima facie bad. Like I don't think that it's immoral. I think there might be circumstances where market mechanisms and private ownership can actually assist with human flourishing, but I think there needs to be like serious limits put on that. So I guess I'm just kind of being charitable and saying there is a way to make the argument from the socialist perspective, only if aren't saying that all of the private means of production need to be owned publicly. You could say if you're some sort of doctrinaire socialist that socialism can only occur if all the means of productions are state owned, then I guess you could make an argument and say, well, liberal socialism is impossible insofar as the liberalism implies that there can be private ownership in some circumstances.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. That's how I think of I think like socialism doesn't necessarily get rid of private ownership or markets. Actually, this is why I'm really glad. As much as I have some disagreements with Vosh, I'm glad that he's popularized market socialism because it seems to be like a more pragmatic sort of take. I don't think we should make everything worker co-ops like some of those people do, but it's more like we're still keeping a market, keeping things that we know function, but with like a socialist attitude to make things better, which I think is way better discourse when we're talking about like what socialism is. And the way I actually look at socialism, and I think this is what really bothered me about the Richard Wolff Destiny debate, is Destiny acted as if socialism had to be communism. Like he was like, because he's like, good for him. He's like read some Marx. Like he hasn't read much, but he's read enough to be able to like argue against a bunch of like dummies on the internet. But I think when he's talking about that, he's describing something more like communism, in my opinion. And I think socialism, and this is something I've been like really working on, which this podcast really helped me with, is I was like, I don't think socialism isn't capitalism, which sounds so like wrong to most people, but it seems to be like the transition from like a capitalist society to something like that we could call communism, whether it's actually like Marx's conception or it's something totally different. It seems to be more of a transition through that. So to me, socialism is just more of a capitalism with an emphasis of like workers' rights and like social welfare and some sort of control, like public control over the economy in whatever way that like manifests itself. Like whether that's like through worker cooperatives, social wealth fund, or whatever else. To me, that's what socialism is. It's more that. It's not like antithetical to capitalism. It just is like it's almost anti-capitalist capitalism is how I kind of see it. And I think that's why those debates don't go well. I think like when we're trying to define socialism, you either get stuck admitting that it's liberalism, or you get stuck admitting that it's or you have to stick with communism. Like you have to go full communism. And every time that's how those debates go. Every time I've watched them, every single time they get pushed into defending no class, no state communism, which isn't what they're wanting to like talk about. So I think the way we approach socialism as being antithetical to capitalism is problematic because I just don't think it. I don't think it is. I think it is kind of capitalistic.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, recently I've been kind of trying to push this. I mean, not push very hard, but lately I've been kind of playing with this label of nonpartisan leftist instead of like liberal
Oh
socialist.
yeah,
Although I
I saw
still
that
think,
tweet. Yeah.
Yeah. So that tweet, right? And like, I think like the point of that, I was trying to explain, like, I guess like really what I care about when I say leftism, right, is just like I just want to make sure that human beings can all flourish as much as possible. Obviously, there's a lot of question about what that means necessarily, but that's, you can think about that philosophically and could go on forever. And then it's just the argument that I said before, right, that like poverty, severe inequality, and like political and economic power concentrations, right, tend to interfere with those things. But then like the nonpartisan part of it is, which I think I'm kind of thinking maybe that's not the right word for what I mean, is really just that I like don't know. It's like an attitude of uncertainty, right? About like how are we going to achieve those aims? Like how do we ensure as much human flourishing and like as possible? And I'm like just not really sure about what are the like I have to be open to what the evidence might show me that is going to that is going to actually help further that goal, right? So and I think also my attitude is again like a rejection of hardline radicalism, right, where people just want to be radical for radical's sake and kind of like stand and fall on identifying with a label like socialist or whatever. I would rather just be like, well, what does the evidence show for what's going to make people's lives better? And I want to be open to that, whatever it is, right? So like it means that I'm not going to be, hostile to market mechanisms. If you can show me the arguments that that's like actually going to like reduce poverty and severe inequality and like it's going to reduce economic and political power concentrations, then I feel like I'm going to be for it, or at least open to thinking about it, right? And I'd rather go in with this kind of attitude of openness and uncertainty about like what's going to actually lead. But what I'm not open and uncertain about is that like I want human flourishing and I want to make sure that we reduce severe, like that's the kind of non-negotiable part of me, and that's the leftist commitment. But then the other part of like how we do it is like I guess more of an empirical question.
Yeah, I know. I think that's super good. Like that's kind of my position as well. Is like I want to be like I told you my story and everything. I'm like focused on like how do we make things better, and I'm open to like
Exactly.
however this can manifest because I don't think like we know exactly we don't know the perfect solution. We have to kind of like figure things out. What works? Like what works now? What can we do now? Instead of like going like, oh, we need to like have a revolution and then own the means of production. And we're like, well, what does that even mean? If we can keep markets and like markets end up creating better outcomes for people, I'm okay with that. I just want to make things better, and then we continually improve that over time, with whatever the best way to do that, is at the time. So yeah,
Yeah,
I think that
exactly.
openness is good, and it's like it's totally antithetical to like that dogmatism we were talking about before, which I think is super important. And I know like the online left isn't all of the left, but I wish it was more like that within the online left than it is currently.
There's so the online left is so easily triggered by any mention of like incrementalism or something. This actually came up in the Vanguard podcast. I think Matt and I were like, well, like whenever any space that I see that's going to further those left-wing goals that I care about, I'm going to take those openings, right? I'm not going to be like I won't settle unless it's whatever thing, revolution, or I'm not going to settle for anything other than like a $20 minimum wage or whatever the issue will be. It's like if I see an opening for increasing and making those things better, like I want to take them. And it's just funny how like I noticed in the chat when I was on that podcast how that like these online leftists are just so quick to jump to this conclusion. Well, the fact that you even use the word incremental change must mean that you want to like support the status quo. That must mean that like you just like want to keep capitalism and keep people like in their place and maintain like the inequality. And it's like, dude, like that's not at all like how are you jumping to these conclusions? It's funny.
Yeah, I'd almost argue that your position is more revolutionary than theirs, because what you're doing when you do that is you're every chance that you get to push closer to like whatever the ideal is that we're trying to get to, you're taking it. Unlike these people who want to wait for like Lenin to come back from the dead and like bring the revolution in. It's like they're sitting and like complaining and just like hoping something will happen, and they're super doomer pilled, like the world sucks right now, we need to like overthrow everything. Well, I would say the more revolutionary approach, really, in a weird way, is the like more reformist like idea, like of like taking every chance that we have to make things better, like actively always being engaged in doing that. To me, that is like the real like revolutionary approach, versus this idea of like I'm not going to settle for anything other than abolishing capitalism like as soon as possible.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I felt like I noticed this. I'm not, I don't love Andrew Yang, but what I find interesting, and obviously lately he had a pretty cringe take on like the Israel Palestine thing, like that
Yeah.
was a pretty bad tweet. But what I kind of find interesting is like the hostility that the left has towards him. Like, let's just say before the Israel Palestine thing, like I just noticed that there was like a lot of dismissal. And look, he's not perfect, but I guess the thing that I found interesting about Andrew Yang was I kind of saw him as a bit of an opportunity for change, that I think the left was a little bit too quick to just ignore. And the reason I think that he was an interesting opportunity was because of the amount of people who are on the pretty far right started liking him. And I know like for some people that like threw them off and they're like, oh, we got to stay clear of this guy. But to me, I was like, well, here's an opportunity. Like, of all these people like Andrew Yang, and then like Democrats could get behind him, like that could be, and it's like, yeah, UBI is not going to solve all our problems, but like, it's certainly going to put everybody in a better position to take it a step further after that. Once everybody has like a UBI, it's like everyone's in a better position to, I mean, there's all kinds of outcomes that would make better, right? Like right now, people are so stuck with their jobs that like they have no kind of bargaining power if they have a shitty job. Whereas if you had a UBI, like people would have more like a buffer zone where they could say, okay, well, I'm just going to quit this job because it sucks because you're not treating me that well. And I'll just live on UBI for a little bit and then I'll go find something better, and it'll like create better incentives for everybody. So I don't know. I saw him. I was very intrigued by the amount that the right liked him, and that kind of piqued my interest. And I was like, this could be an opportunity, but like nobody wanted to take it.
Nobody
It
wanted.
seemed to.
Yeah. Well, the crazy thing to me too is when. So I was supporting Bernie, but I definitely liked some things that Andrew Yang talked about. Like I thought UBI was like a great idea, and it was weird. Like a lot of the left was almost against UBI, at least at first. A lot of them now were having a growth of a pragmatic left online. Thankfully for people like Mouthy and like-minded people getting together and that spreading. It's been super helpful. So things like UBI have been talked about more. But when he was first running, I remember like people were discrediting the idea of UBI. Like even Vosh made a video trying to say like UBI is bad. And I know like Yang's way of implementing it had some issues, but like overall the concept of UBI is like a really good one. Like I was like, everyone talking about how Bernie is like a radical over here. UBI is probably one of the most radical things being like presented like during this election. Like we're talking about like giving people a basic income. Like that's insane. Like that is very like radical in my opinion, and like could be totally revolutionary for the left. Like like you were saying, like you get like you could quit a job if like you're not stuck at a job because of your bargaining power, right? You could leave and then you can go somewhere else because you have that UBI to rely on. And I even think about
Yeah.
like content. I really like making content. If I had UBI, I could be like, okay, I'm gonna give this a good shot for like a good bit of time. I'm gonna like quit my job. I'm gonna really work on this. I'm gonna grind this and see if I can make this like work. And like all the other opportunities that could stem from that. To me, UBI was one of the most like radical like policies being brought up, and I thought it was so weird that the left was like, at least online, was anti like Yang's
Yeah.
UBI, and I
Yeah.
was like, what? This is such a good idea. Like, what are you talking about?
And what I also think, like, is just the way that I guess one of the things that I see also with American politics, especially, is just like the polarization is so bad. So I'm always very intrigued when I see a figure that starts to interestingly have appeal for on both sides. And I just thought that was such a kind of missed opportunity to be like, well, what is it about Yang that's actually attracting people who are like rabid Trump supporters, right? Like, why? Like, there's like an opportunity here, because I think one of the biggest problems in American politics is just like polarization, and I mean, I don't know how any of that stuff's gonna get fixed. I mean, there's also big institutional problems with the states, right? The fact that your system of government has so many veto points, like the fact
Yeah,
that you have to have all the Senate and the House and everything to get anything fucking done, and like the Supreme Court and filibusters, and I mean, it's insane. Like, I mean, our system up here in Canada is not perfect, but like in a parliamentary system, at least if you win a majority government, you just get to do whatever you want, right? Like,
yeah,
and it's funny. Like, I think Americans have like a bit of a predisposition to be like terrified by that. They're like, because the narratives on both sides is always like, what's going to happen if the other side gets into power? Like, they're going to destroy everything. Like, it's always this crazy narrative that it's like this catastrophic event. But like in parliamentary systems, like we live with that, where one party wins a majority, they get to do whatever they want, and they'll have a government for like 8, 10 years. The sky doesn't fall, but guess what does happen is you get to see what that party does. You actually get to have them implement their policies, and then you can decide if you like it or not.
yeah,
There in America, it's like nothing gets done. So you can't even judge whether one side's actually going to succeed or like what the outcomes of their policy proposals are going to be, because it's almost impossible for either side to get anything done. So it's just, I mean, that's a bit of an aside, but it makes just change in your system very, very difficult.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think like one of the things that you said about like worried about the other side getting power, it seems like we're really focused on like the Republicans are really focused about not necessarily for them getting power as much as just keeping the Democrats from getting power. And then vice versa. The Democrats are like worried about the Republicans getting power, not worried as much about them having power. And I think that's so weird. And the way the radicalization is so bad too, which is, or the polarization, I mean, is so bad because the Republicans see Democrats as like communist, and like the Democrats see Republicans as like fascist. And it's, to me, this is so odd because I have to argue with like lefties all the time, and I have to say like Republicans aren't like fascist; they're like conservatives. Like there's a difference between a fascist and a conservative. Like I get it, you can disagree with the conservative, but you like acting like every conservative is a fascist is like, one, just incorrect, and two, like super not helpful, because like with the system we have, we do need to at least have some sort of agreement on things. Like you were saying, like with Yang having like this weird sort of like right wing, left wing people both supporting him. We do need the, because of the system, how the system works, we do need a little bit of that. So like painting the other side as like totally fascist, terrible people, and then the other side doing it to the left is all communist, leaves like
Yeah.
no room for pragmatism, like no room to actually get
Yeah.
shit done.
Exactly, and I mean, the fact that, because getting systematic change in the States is gonna be so fucking hard, almost impossible, that's why my ears perked up when I noticed that people were just on the right were loving Yang, because it's like, I think that to get any sort of, like, real systematic change in the States, you're gonna need a figure that is somehow supported by both sides, who's gonna come in and actually, like, change some of the systems and institutions. I mean, so yeah, it seemed like I mean, I mean, I'm probably wrong, in terms of what would have happened. Like, I'm probably being overly optimistic, but just that aspect really interested me, just given all those other facts about how hard it would be to change anything in American politics.
Yeah, I think what we really need is Bernie did a really good job at this because he didn't get as many like right wingers like Yang did, but he definitely did pull some, and it was through his like working class like sort of like rhetoric, which I know can be dangerous. It can slip into like crazy like populism that you get like figures like Jimmy Dore and whatnot, that I totally think
Yeah.
have ridiculous takes. But I think like talking about like working people and like the middle class and the lower class, and like truly like showing that you want to pass policies that help them, which I think one Yang did do. I think UBI was something that everyone was like, wait, I'm gonna get help, like I'm gonna get something, like awesome. Which is why I think he got a little bit of pull from both sides as well, because like I'm sure poor Republicans out there wouldn't mind getting like, you know, $1,000 check every month, especially because they already pay into taxes and whatnot. And I think we saw similar things with Bernie, with especially with his 2016 campaign, where he definitely did pull some like people from the right because he was focusing on the working people. And I think like that's what we're really gonna need if we really want to push some things, is some sort of like not calling conservatives fascist, and like focusing on like their issues too, like not just painting them as bad and that we should just completely ignore them, but like, okay, yeah, I disagree with your beliefs, we can deal with that later. Like what can we do to improve your life now that could possibly even get you to the point of thinking about these other things that we want you to be better on. um but yeah, I totally agree, that's like super important.
Yeah, for sure, man, for sure. So I think I'm probably gonna have to take off pretty soon because I gotta go meet my girlfriend. We're doing an exchange. She's stopping at the subway on her way here, so I gotta get there by 4.
Okay, yeah,
But,
that's
man, I
good.
really enjoyed this, and, like, I mean, if you want, I could come back and get back on if you had other things that you wanted to talk about, or we could just talk again some other time, man. I really enjoyed it, so I'd be happy to do that
Dude,
also.
I'd be so down. I really appreciate it. I'm glad you messaged me because this was super cool. I was super excited. I was bragging to everyone. So thanks for talking to me. And yeah, we should definitely do it again sometime. I'll like
Yeah,
hit
man,
you up.
I'd be happy to do it again sometime, man. Keep in touch, and, yeah, and, like, obviously, if you have any questions about, like, theory or like, philosophy, and maybe if you're thinking about going back to school and, like, are interested in advice and stuff like that, I'm always happy to talk about those kinds of things, so anytime.